let's get the show on the road. Welcome to this Power 30. My name is Sam Johnson. I'm one of the sales trainers here at PayTrace. With me, not as always, but as often, is Eric Jenks.
Hello, hello.
Welcome back, Eric. Eric is our National Sales Manager. For those of you that are new to Power 30, I'm going to give you a little bit of introduction into what to expect. Power 30s are 30-minute webinars to give you some insight into PayTrace, into the industry, and some of the experts that keep the ball rolling here on our end. This is your opportunity to interact and engage with us. You are muted, so you're not able to actually vocally engage with us, but if you look around your computer monitor, you should see a little Q&A box on your Zoom window. Go ahead and open that up and type in your questions, your comments, your emotional outbursts. I was telling Eric, I'm not allowed to have emotional outbursts on here this morning because I can hear some echoing. So I'm going to try to keep my volume level, but you guys are allowed to through the Q&A feature. We're going to talk for a little bit, kind of an interview style, and then we're going to take about 5 to 10 minutes at the end to answer your questions, give you some cool resources, and get you back on with your day. So if all that sounds good, normally at this time, we do a little bit of introduction to our guest, but Eric, you've been on here so many times. I don't have much more to talk about you.
Yeah, let's not bore people.
But I do want to mention, right, we're wearing Hawaiian shirts. This was kind of coordinated. I don't really know why. Eric, why are we wearing Hawaiian shirts today?
Well, I started to develop a reputation for wearing flannels, and I think during COVID pandemic, people have gone for comfort. And I think there was some resistance to additional flannel, which I get. I needed to gather it. So we thought, hey, let's do something fun. Hawaiian sounds good. Who doesn't want to go to Hawaii? So.
Exactly. And fun thing, right before this, we were just chatting and I found out that you actually haven't been to Hawaii before.
I know. It's a insider joke. I've been to 47 states. Hawaii is yet to be checked off the list. Can't wait to go. Some friends have been there. Very, very happy for them.
So if here's a call to action for all of you on this. If you have a sales trip, maybe your
exactly
having their annual sales.
How do we make this a work expense?
Yeah, maybe just consider us, especially Eric, don't worry about me, but
I'm really interested in any ISOs starting up in Hawaii right now. So
I mean, they need credit card processing in the islands, right?
Exactly.
All right. Well, keep that in mind. Think of Eric. He needs a tan. Sorry, bud, but it's true. I do too. All right. Let's get into the good stuff. So you're here because we sent out some emails and you may have seen on LinkedIn that we're going to be talking about security.
Yeah.
Which is it's an area that we haven't really discussed too much in these type of formats, but we should. It's pretty important, right?
Yeah, it's been in the news a lot too lately. It seems like it's been on our news.
I feel like I'm kind of seeing it all over. In fact, Eric, you sent me a link to another webinar on security, on payment security that was happening at this exact same moment.
I know. I was like, I want to attend that, and then I'm like, oh snap, I'm going to be somewhere else.
I know. So. Hopefully, there's not some cannibalization going on there, but we've seen kind of an uptick lately, and there's been some trends. Especially over the last year, 12 months, may or may not be related to COVID, but Eric, what are some of the things that you're seeing out there?
Yeah, I mean, fraud's been around, right? I mean, it's just follow the money, right? In a lot of ways. So, historically, I mean, I remember a little over a year ago, we were just, really trying to help merchants with unauthorized refunds, right? I mean, it seemed like this referenced refund versus unreferenced refund was a big deal in the industry. Visa and MasterCard were changing some of the regulations, processors were changing requirements, and really painful for merchants. Yeah. Folks were, hitting their API or, losing access to their credentials, and folks were running refunds. And that was, man, that hurt because it's just money right out of their checking account. And we pivoted, made some changes on that and made it a little more difficult for the fraudsters. And we're really glad to see that kind of almost go to zero now. We haven't had any of those types of incidents for a very long time, but especially over the last 90 days, I would say, starting November really of of last year, we just started seeing carding events start to skyrocket. And I mean, there's always been carding, um, but it definitely has taken on a whole new dimension
For sure.
within the last 90 days. I mean, we've, even organize a special team so that we can respond quickly to merchants and be proactive on that. But we felt like we started hearing from our partners and felt like it'd be a great conversation to chat and kind of get some of the experience out in the field a little broader. Hopefully we'll have the same response we saw with the fraudulent returns
Mhm.
that start to happen with the carding. So
Yeah, and you mentioned the fraudulent returns, right? We haven't really seen that. So we've seen kind of this evolution of fraud, and really I
yeah,
feel like that's always taken place, right? If
sure.
you go back to, you know, I'm just going to throw you under the bus when you were first in the industry, right?
Yeah.
E-commerce wasn't as big or prevalent back then. Um,
Mm.
and fraud was different,
It
right?
was definitely different. Yeah, it was definitely different. And I think part of this too is we'll reference this document, but I think we've seen a rise in what some folks are calling digital transactions, but the rise in e-commerce, the rise in mobile transactions, really skyrocketing. I saw one article. It's 42% increase on these kind of e-commerce type transactions,
Hmm,
and of no surprise then a 48% increase in fraud in that
sure,
category.
the
So
correlation.
it's kind of like in investing. You want to be in the money. The fraudsters, they want to be in the money, right? So they're following the dollars for sure.
Exactly. Since we're going to throw out data and quotes and stuff, I actually came across a CNBC article about fraud, and there is a quote from the CEO of Merchant Risk Council on there that really correlates to how fraudsters pivot. Let me see if I can pull it up here. I thought this was pretty cool. She says, fraud is like an arms race. Whatever technology is being implemented, the fraudsters will eventually figure out a workaround. So you have to constantly keep investing. And that's the cost of business, right?
It's cost business, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so for sales reps, I'm just like, this is your new Cold War, right? I mean, I love that quote. It's, here we are. We do one thing and then they counter with something else. And the market moves here and then the fraudster moves there. This is the Cold War that merchants are fighting over
Yep.
their cold hard cash, right? And so that's a great quote.
Yeah. There's never going to be that perfect solution, but you always want to be very proactive. Um, now, I want to go back a little bit because you had mentioned carding as being
Yeah.
kind of a very popular way of scammers, fraudsters to take advantage of businesses. Could you provide just a little bit of a definition? Some people that may be watching this may be merchants, they may be newer to the industry. What is carding?
Yeah. Yeah. We try to be really sensitive, as we describe things like this, because if you use the word hacked, right, that has like this connotation, right? No one wants to be hacked, right? And what's a fraud incident, things like that. And so carding is a very old form of fraud, and it's essentially where folks, the bad guys, the malicious actor, sometimes we will call them, they oftentimes buy lists of credit cards off the dark web, and those lists become more valuable if they can say, hey, it's good, right? I have a list of good cards versus a list of bad cards. So how do they tell if those cards are good? Right? They run them through one of our merchants, you know merchant accounts, basically, right? And they try to run a lot of them really fast, right? I remember, well over a decade ago, I got a phone call one time from one of our merchants, and they're like, why are you declining all my transactions? You owe me millions of dollars. I'm like, what are you talking about? And they had logged into their website and seen all of these transactions decline. And they were very upset with me because they felt like they had won the jackpot. Had to, break the bad news to them that, no, you're a victim of carding, right?
Right.
Somebody had literally been running a transaction more than every second was coming through their website. I'm like, you just can't have a customer go in that fast and type it in, right? And but they are able to run through thousands of cards, find a couple of them that are good, and then they turn around and sell those on the dark web. So
And what I find interesting about these types of attacks is that these are not going to be high dollar attacks, right? They're trying to
mhm.
just validate that these cars are legitimate, that they're still working and they
Yeah,
haven't been canceled.
yeah,
Usually we're seeing them like 5 cents to $1. So it's not,
yeah,
you know, they're going to get this big windfall about all these approved transactions, and right, they should be reversed eventually. But um, a lot of the times when we think of fraud, or when businesses think of fraud, they think of the cost of the product, right? If I'm,
yeah,
one fraudulent attempt and I send out merchandise, a couple $100s worth of merchandise, that's
yeah,
fraud. But, these types of carding, the cost to the business is pretty astronomical. Can you talk about, what that really looks like in terms of actual dollars?
yeah, yeah. A couple things. And so, um, for sales reps, grab your pen. I'm going to give you a couple numbers here that I think can help you. And this is really kind of our goal, right? Is to help mitigate some of these instances that are happening. So, a couple stats that kind of stood out to me. Number one, uh, at this point, over 45% of Americans have had their personal information compromised within the last 5 years.
Hmm.
Right. So if you're going to roll the dice, I mean, these are really good Vegas odds that if you're talking to a merchant, it's pretty likely they or someone they know have personally experienced fraud. So you have a leg in right off the bat, right? So 45% of Americans, jot that down. The other one that really stood out to me, and this is we'll share this resource in a little bit, is this: a hack attack or the fraud incident happens every 39 seconds, right? So every 39 seconds. I mean, when I saw that, my mind was like, oh, right? I mean, that's something that I would be sharing, during the course of my sales presentation with every merchant, especially if they have an omni-channel presence, right? Or if they're looking to go omni-channel, because they're definitely moving into the world where the fraud is an issue. In fact, I saw another article on payments. We can share this link later, but they basically said that in the last 2 years, right? So this is pretty recent data. Online fraud hit half of companies worldwide, right? So in the last 2 years, half of companies have experienced fraud, and those businesses usually had 6 confirmed incidents over that 2 years, right? So a couple things: every 39 seconds, somebody's poking around saying, hey, can I steal your money? 39 seconds, man. That's something, man, you got to be telling merchants about. And the reality is this is becoming part of your sales presentation, because of literally half of the companies worldwide have had 6 incidents in the last 2 years. So like, what does that mean dollar wise, right? Sam, you have some numbers that you saw that were just like mind blowing. I mean, but like the big numbers, the $1 billion numbers, right?
Yeah. Well, the total annual cost of fraud, this is 2019 pre-pandemic, was about $29 billion.
29 billion.
Yeah.
I just don't even know how to fathom
How,
that.
how do you quantify that, right?
Yeah,
And that's
that's a,
that. I
that's
think
a
that's
lot of widgets.
Yeah, I think that's the world cost, and the United States alone makes up, from what I read about this, was about a third of that in total. Um,
So what
so
is that? 29 divided by 3, like
about
10
10
billion.
billion, $10 billion.
Yeah, it's a
So
huge deal. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, we have a team that's watching this, and so I looked this morning and looked to see like who had an attack last night, right? And so we have one merchant that basically had almost 80,000 transactions that were run. And we looked back, and over the previous 4 weeks, they averaged about 80. So normally doing about 80 transactions, 60, 80. So like 60, 80, 50, like in that range. So obviously 80,000 transactions is out of the norm.
yeah,
And if you do the math just on our cost, that's a $4,000 bill that they woke up to this morning, right?
just
I
on the
mean,
per
talk about
transaction.
freaking heartburn.
Yeah,
And so our team, had the joy, and I say that partly true, but partly tongue in cheek, to call them and say, hey, buddy, can we help you? Because you got a problem on your hands.
yeah,
And so that was one of 5 events. It was certainly on the larger side. But we've seen some of these bills. I think the largest I've saw within in the last 3 months, one was about $12,000 worth of fraud that these carding events had racked up over a very short period of time.
Right.
So for merchants, let's put that in perspective. Most of our merchants, they're used to like a $20 to $100 bill. And so for them to come in and get a $4,000 bill, man, that's like payroll, right? That's like I have to let somebody go to cover that bill, right? I mean, this is literally devastating. And the folks on this call are super aware that that's only part of the problem, right? And now you have to also, we're the gateway, but what about the processor? What about all those authorization fees? And then God forbid they actually have some sales that go through that turn into chargebacks, right? I mean, they essentially can very quickly, this $4,000 bill turns into, $12,000, in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
So
Roughly the actual cost of fraud is for every, I think it's for every dollar spent, the actual cost to the business is about $4, just under $4.
yeah,
So it's a big deal, right? It's something that you really need to be proactive. This is not something that you can, fix after the fact. I mean, you can fix it after the fact, but we want to prevent that from happening.
yeah.
So, I feel like we're at a point now where hopefully we've scared some people.
Or
That's
they're
not
like,
really the
we already
goal,
know
but
that. Give me some hope here.
right. Let's give you some hope. So, you know, let's talk about fraud tools, solutions, right? How can we best mitigate this from happening? And you know what? Let's take a quick pause and I'll let you mull on that, Eric, because I want to know, to everybody that's on this call, how has fraud affected you? Over the last year,
Yeah, that's a
how
good.
many of your merchant accounts have experienced some form of fraudulent attacks, right? Either a big event like a carding scheme, or even just those smaller, fraudulent, chargeback incidents where somebody's not
Wow, we've
playing
got
by
a
the
good
rules.
mix here.
Yeah, this is very interesting. So some people, right? Not surprisingly, but the smallest response that we're getting is none. So for the three of you that responded that you haven't had any fraud, kudos to you guys. Either you're doing something really well, or you've dodged a bullet. But it looks like most people have endured some form of fraud.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Jenks,
Yeah.
you've been dealing with this. You've seen all sorts of different frauds.
Yeah.
What would you recommend to folks on this call on
Yeah.
being proactive?
Yeah. It's a good question. It's a difficult question. I'm just going to say the answer is going to evolve over time. We'll talk about some of the technical specs and talk about the philosophy on fraud. I really appreciate LexisNexis came out with a really cool article. We'll share that link later. They use these words: utilize multiple layers of fraud defense. I just like that, multiple layers. This is a situation where I think maybe a politician got it right. It takes a village to solve the fraud problem here. And certainly I think your gateway partner, PayTrace, has an opportunity to help on that, but it's really going to take a lot of different entities. Do we want to share that blog post? Because I think it's a really good talking point. So we created a blog post a couple of weeks back where we talk about some best practices. So yeah, Sam's going there, and go to our homepage, paytrace.net, upper right corner blog, scroll down, and you'll see this best practices to mitigate card fraud. And there are things you can do. Number one, you got to start talking about it, right? You've got to get out in front of this thing. I would say that, for my team, we're now talking about fraud and how we manage fraud during the sales process, right? It's part of our post sell process. So I think number one, you've got to do that. Number two, we got to start utilizing some resources. So I'm going to say right now, if you're talking to a merchant, and especially if they're using an open source software like WooCommerce, I mean, I'm a huge advocate for open source. So don't get me wrong. And WooCommerce is one of the biggest carts that are out there. But because they're open source and because they're so popular, quarter of the market, e-commerce market uses it, they're a huge target.
Mhm.
And merchants can plug in and add services. One of those services has to be CAPTCHA, right? So one of our partners, let's use Google's technology, right? It's not bulletproof, But again, we're adding in multiple layers of making this difficult. Um, Address verification doesn't necessarily solve it, but it's a great tool. It's one of the main tools that Visa and MasterCard use. So let's definitely be using that. Within the PayTrace suite, we have the ability to essentially prevent settlement, if some of these things don't match up, AVS and CVV and things like that. Maybe want to consider using some of our anti-fraud tools. And then also you see here this, the two-factor, sometimes multi-factor verification. There are third-party services, and we've worked with Count, we've worked with WordFence. Our partners have utilized a lot of other companies, and as they're starting to see maybe their volume increase, it's time to start considering, is some of these third-party services going to be helpful in limiting some of these kind of risks. And I would say the answer at this point is just kind of yes. Who would own a retail store and not have doors on their business? Right? It's like we pretty much believe doors work. We believe security tags work in retail. Well, we need some of those technologies to come over to your e-commerce store. It used to be enough just to kind of like, hey, look, I'm going to start up a shopping cart and going to have people check out. Well, guess what? Now we need to have some additional layers of support to make that happen. So multiple layers of defense. I'm just going to call it out. If you're not talking about what you're going to do during fraud, if you're not going to talk about how your processor and your technology support is going to help people with fraud, when they wake up to a $4,000 bill, you're behind the 8 ball. It's really late at that point. And so I would say, borrow our blog. In fact, I would just say you should copy that URL. And if you don't have your own blog, just send them copies of ours, but use the content of that blog and start having the dialogue with your customers. It's kind of where I started. Like half of Americans have already experienced this. So they'll appreciate the fact that you're coming to try to help them. Every 39 seconds, this is happening in America. So again, it's relevant right now. I'm telling you, we've had a 5-fold increase, over the last 90 days. And by providing them some tools, you'll start to help mitigate some of these things when they do actually happen.
Yeah, and just also to put on our sales hats, it's a great retention tool, right? This is a great conversation to have with your merchants. It's going to build more trust with you, with between you and your clients, and right, you have their best interests in mind. Again, if we're being payment consultants, this is one of the best conversations and one that you should have fairly regularly, right, with your accounts.
Yeah, I just say, like, when I own an insurance company for a little while, and they would train agents like, hey, when someone calls and they've had an accident, how do you respond to that call, right? And we knew that if we responded well, we could keep that person during that trying time, right? If we responded poorly, they were probably going to leave us, right? Very similar scenario right now is that you need to start preparing when that fraud call happens as the payment professional. How are you going to deal with that? And I would encourage you, one of the tips we have is establish the upfront contract with your customer and just be like, hey, when this happens, you call me, right? And we will work through this together, right? And you have them agree, yeah, if this happens, I will call you. And now what you've done is you've created yourself a team and a partnership to resolve this. And then I just say, look, when that happens, make sure you call our team as well, our customer service team. We want to help you through this. As a company, we don't want to profit off of fraud. We want to make sure folks are using the system in an equitable, ethical ways. And, we'll do what we can do to help you work through this. But establish that upfront contract, right? Make sure that they understand when that happens. The first thing they're going to do is, after maybe they swear a couple times, call you and let's work through this.
I love that. Step 1, emotional outburst. Step 2,
yes,
call Eric Jenks.
Yeah.
So cool. Well, I don't want to stifle this conversation because I really love where this is going, but we actually are at the 25-minute mark. I know your clock's covered up there, Eric, but
yes,
I do want to tackle a couple of these questions that we've had coming in.
Yes.
So we've got one that talks about EMV. Kind of came in very early from Tom, and Tom's asking, are merchants that are EMV compliant, are they free from liability due to fraud?
Yeah, so there's certain loaded questions, and I would say they are free from some liability, right? So there's a reason why Visa asks people to invest in that equipment, and it protects them from some liability. Um, there's still lots of liability to go around, even with EMB merchants.
Yeah.
So definitely worth going to, get in front of your customer as often as you can. It's generally lower risk. Buy the equipment when it makes sense.
Absolutely. If you don't have EMV and you're taking card present transactions, then you're completely liable for everything. But
Yeah, it's your risk profile changes
yeah,
entirely.
exactly. Todd's here,
Hey,
and
Todd.
Todd's asking, does PayTrace monitor and ever engage or to disable the API if we notice fraud, or is it up really to, the processor, the ISO, the merchant to disable that?
Yeah. So we're caught between a rock and a hard spot on that one, Todd. So our agreements make our partners responsible for that, right? So we literally, I mean, we work through our partners. We provide the technology and the training to enable our partner success. So we're not really supposed to do that. I will say that we have had a couple times where things have gotten out of control, right? That $12,000 bill that I was telling you about, we ended up needing to jump in and turn it off. And so that's the exception rather than the rule. We do follow up with merchants pretty much every day, when we see things that look suspicious, and sometimes it's not. Maybe they had a big event and they just had a lot of transactions and we're super happy for them. But if it does look sketch, then we're gonna give them a buzz. We don't generally turn it off at that point. If we can't get in touch with the rep, then we go to the merchant and just or sorry, if we can't get in touch with the merchant, then we go to the rep and see if they can help us.
And is that typically how it goes in these scenarios, Eric? We reach out to the merchant first when we.
Always to the merchant first. Yeah. Yeah, we want to go straight to the source, see if everything's good. I would say 50% of the time, the merchant service providers already talked to them, right? So even though we're working this first thing in the morning, the merchant service provider, they're you guys are more at risk than we are. Right? Our nickel's on the line. You guys have the whole chargeback. So most of the time, it's a work in progress. But half the time, they have no idea what's going on, and so
Yeah, and that plays into one of the recommendations on our blog is, encourage merchants to just keep up to date with their reporting, right?
yeah,
Keep tabs on that, or keep some sort of process in place to
yeah,
monitor their
yeah,
transactions. I think that's just a really easy tip to follow.
yep.
I think we have time for maybe one more.
All right, let's try me.
I've got Mike. Eric. You'd mentioned a couple kind of chargeback solutions, security, third-party solutions. Does PayTrace work with any, third-party chargeback solutions, or
Yeah.
how does that work outside of PayTrace?
Yeah, we have no official partnerships with companies that do that right now. So like if you go over to Kevin's page and look for integration, ISVs, there's nobody there currently. That's not to say that we don't have a lot of merchants that use Count with a K. I mean, they're a big company that does this, along with some others, right? I mentioned WordFence, they're a WordPress plugin. Lots of people using those, but it's a merchant level decision to see what works best for them.
For sure.
So that may change in the future. I mean, if this keeps up, I mean, folks are asking for that. It's a complicated decision for us because it's like where some of these fraud services really specialize on retail type of fraud. They're really geared to like the Amazons of the world, and we're in a B2B space, and that makes it more difficult. So
Yeah. So I'd say really the next steps for this, we are at the end of time. If you have more questions, please, send them over to our sales team or our support team, right? If they're more technical. If I would say, check out that blog page that we referenced. We're going to be sending out some follow-up materials with some of the resources and some of the articles that we've quoted here on today's call. So check those out. Again, keep up that education and be proactive. Feel free to share that blog with your merchants. We also put together a nice little YouTube video that highlights some of the things that we've talked about and some other best practices. So again, just a really great way to keep engaged with your clients.
yeah, and if they have questions, certainly you can reach out to my team.
Yeah.
And if we if we didn't answer your question, we'll follow up with you, make sure that you get the answers you're looking for. So thanks, Sam.
Awesome.
everyone.
Thanks, Eric, for this awesome conversation. And thank you all for being on this call today. We will have this recording published on our YouTube channel shortly, and stay tuned for a follow-up email with those resources shortly. Folks, have a fantastic rest of your week. Take care.
See you guys.